My name is Grant, and I believe that every dish tells a story. The story of my bistro, the Hearth, was supposed to be a simple one. It was about passion, about a man leaving a soulless career to chase a dream of fire, flavor, and community. But for the past year, another story has been written over mine, a bitter narrative scrawled in the margins by an unseen hand. It's a tale of anonymous calls to the health department just before a holiday weekend, of perfectly timed one-star reviews that appear in orchestrated waves, of my best line cook suddenly getting an offer he can't refuse from a corporate competitor. My little bistro, my dream, is being slowly and methodically strangled. The author of this tragedy is my father-in-law, Alistair Croft. He's a restaurant magnate, a titan of the city's culinary scene. His flagship, Croft's Table, is an institution, a place where deals are made and anniversaries are celebrated under the soft glow of ridiculously expensive chandeliers. When I married his daughter, Isabella, he didn't gain a son, he gained a rival. He'd pat me on the back at family gatherings, his smile as thin as a slice of prosciutto, and ask how my little project was coming along. He sees the hearth as a charming but ultimately insignificant hobby that has the audacity to exist in his city, in his world. He thinks he's swatting a fly, crushing a small, presumptuous competitor to maintain his dominance. He's a king protecting his throne, and in his mind, that's just business. What Alistair has forgotten, or more accurately, what he never knew, is a secret I've kept for a decade, a ghost I put to rest long before I ever picked up a chef's knife. 10 years ago, before I was Grant the chef, I was someone else. I was the city's most feared, most revered, and most influential food critic. I wrote under a pen name, a persona that became a legend in the culinary world. My word could make a restaurant, and my silence could condemn it to obscurity. He's forgotten that his own flagship, Croft's Table, was a struggling, overpriced steakhouse on the verge of failure, until one night, a review appeared online that changed its fortunes forever. A review that praised its hidden potential, that saw the spark of genius in a kitchen that was otherwise phoning it in. A review that put it on the map. My review. I wrote it. I was the silver spoon. Tonight, after a year of silent suffering, after watching my dream be dismantled, piece by piece, by the very man whose empire I helped build, the silver spoon is coming out of retirement. He's sharpening his knives for one final, devastating review. Alistair thinks he's writing the end of my story. He has no idea I'm about to write the end of his. The final straw wasn't a bad review, or another bogus health code complaint. Those were death by 1,000 cuts, infuriating but hard to trace back with absolute certainty. The final straw had a name, Marco. Marco was my sous chef, a kid with fire in his eyes, and magic in his hands. I found him working at a greasy spoon diner, flipping eggs with the grace of a ballet dancer. I saw the talent, the raw, untapped potential. I took him under my wing, taught him everything I knew about sauces, about balancing flavors, about respecting the ingredients. He was more than an employee, he was my protege, he was the future of the Hearth. Last night, he walked into my office after service, his shoulders slumped, his gaze fixed on the floor. He told me he was putting in his 2 weeks' notice. My heart sank. I asked him why, what was wrong. He couldn't look me in the eye, he just mumbled something about a better opportunity. I pressed him, a better opportunity than what I was offering him, a chance to be the creative force in a kitchen we were building together. Finally, he cracked. "It's Croft's Table, chef," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Mr. Croft himself called me, offered me the head sous chef position, double the salary, full benefits, a signing bonus. The air went out of the room. It wasn't just an offer, it was an execution. Double the salary, a signing bonus, for a position that, in the rigid hierarchy of Alistair's corporate kitchens, Marco was at least 5 years away from earning. It was a ludicrous, obscene offer meant to do one thing, and one thing only, rip the heart out of my kitchen. It was a personal targeted strike. It was Alistair's signature on every piece of sabotage from the last year. All the phantom health inspectors, the coordinated reviews complaining about undercooked chicken on a night we only served fish, the suppliers who suddenly lost our orders. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. I just nodded. I told Marco I understood, that I couldn't match the offer, and that I wished him well. What else could I do? yell at him. The kid was 24 and had a mountain of student debt. He was being offered a golden ticket by a man who prints them for a living. It wasn't his fault. It was mine, for being so naive, for thinking I could build something beautiful in the shadow of a man who only knows how to tear things down. After he left, I stood alone in the silence of my kitchen. The stainless steel counters, usually gleaming with promise, looked cold and sterile. The faint smell of yeast and herbs was replaced by the metallic tang of defeat. I walked over to the pass, where I usually place finished dishes, and leaned my whole weight against it, my head in my hands. I felt the vibration of the refrigerators, the low hum of a restaurant in slumber, and it sounded like a funeral dirge. My dream wasn't just failing, it was being murdered, and the killer was shaking my hand at Sunday dinners. My wife Isabella found me like that an hour later. She'd come by after her late shift at the hospital, her face a mixture of concern and exhaustion. She wrapped her arms around my waist from behind, resting her chin on my shoulder. "Tough night?" she asked softly. I couldn't speak at first. The lump in my throat was too big. I just nodded, my hands clenching into fists on the cool metal. "I lost Marco," I finally managed to say, the words feeling like shards of glass. "What? What do you mean you lost him? Did he quit?" "He was poached, Izzy, by your father." She stiffened. "What? No, Dad wouldn't do that. It must be a coincidence. Crofts is always hiring." That's when the fragile dam I'd built around my frustration finally broke. I turned around to face her, my voice sharper than I intended. "A coincidence? They offered him double his salary, and a signing bonus for a job he's not qualified for. This comes after a year of perfectly timed bad reviews. A year of suppliers dropping us for no reason. A year of anonymous tips to the health department. How many coincidences does it take before it's a pattern?" Isabella took a step back, her expression wounded. "You can't know for sure it's him. You're stressed, Grant. You're looking for someone to blame. Who else could it be?" I shot back, my voice rising. "Who else has the motive and the means? Who else called my passion project a cute little hobby to my face? He despises me, Izzy. He despises that I have something of my own, that I didn't come crawling to him for a job in one of his soulless restaurant chains. He's my father," she said, her voice trembling. "He can be difficult. He's proud, but he's not a monster. He wouldn't actively try to ruin you. That would be ruining me too." Her words, meant to be comforting, felt like a betrayal. She was defending him. Even now, faced with this, her first instinct was to protect him. I saw in her eyes that she just couldn't bridge the gap between the father she loved and the ruthless businessman I was describing. And in that moment, I felt a chasm open up between us. She was a Croft. I was just the man who had married one. It wasn't about revenge. Not yet. At that point, it was about survival. But listening to my own wife defend the man who was systematically destroying my life, I felt a cold resolve begin to form in the pit of my stomach. She didn't see it. She couldn't see it. But I would make it so clear that no one could ever deny it again. The fight with Isabella left a ringing silence in its wake. She left for our apartment, leaving me alone in the hollow shell of my restaurant. I wandered through the dark dining room, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. I touched the rough-hewn wood of the tables. I had sanded myself, the soft leather of the banquets I had saved for months to afford. This place was a part of me, an extension of my soul, and it was dying. The weight of the last year pressed down on me, the cumulative effect of 100 tiny aggressions. I collapsed into a chair, the one at our best table by the window, and let the despair wash over me. For the first time, I truly considered giving up. Maybe Alistair was right. Maybe it was just a cute little hobby. Maybe I was a fool for thinking I could compete. My mind drifted back, searching for a time when things felt simpler, when the world of food was a source of joy, not a battlefield. I thought about meeting Isabella. It was at a farmer's market 5 years ago. I was smelling tomatoes, lost in thought, and she bumped into me, sending a cascade of organic apples tumbling across the pavement. We both knelt to pick them up, and our hands touched. It was a cliché, a scene straight out of a bad romantic comedy, but it felt real. Her laugh was genuine, Her eyes sparkled with an energy that captivated me instantly. She was a pediatric nurse. She told me. She dedicated her life to healing children. She didn't mention her father was Alistair Croft until our third date. By then, I was already in too deep. When she finally introduced me to him, it was at Croft's table. Of course, the place was a monument to his ego. His portrait, oil on canvas, hung in the lobby. The menu was filled with dishes named after his various accomplishments. Alistair was charming, in the way a predator is charming. He had a firm handshake, a booming voice, and eyes that assessed my worth in a single sweeping glance. When I told him I was a chef, he smiled that thin smile. A noble pursuit, he'd said, his tone dripping with condescension. It's a tough business. Most people don't have the stomach for it. But it's wonderful that you have a passion. He made it sound like I collected stamps. Throughout the dinner he'd regale us with stories of his own genius, his own foresight, his own battles won. He never once asked about my food, my restaurant, or my dreams. I was an accessory to his daughter, a curious pet she'd brought home. The irony was so thick, I could have plated it. Sitting in his palace, a monument built on a foundation I had laid, and he had no idea. My mind flashed back further, a decade into the past. I was a different person then. Grant, the 20-something journalism graduate, drowning in debt and disillusionment. I was working a dead-end job, writing ad copy for a soulless marketing firm. My only escape was food. I'd spend my meager paychecks on meals I couldn't afford, exploring the city's burgeoning food scene, and at night, fueled by cheap whiskey and a simmering rage against mediocrity, I wrote. I started a blog, anonymously. I called it The Silver Spoon. It was raw, unflinching, and brutally honest. I didn't care about free meals or press junkets. I cared about the truth of the plate. I wrote about the technical skill, the balance of flavors, the soul of a dish. My voice, honed by years of writing essays and a natural inclination for cutting through nonsense, found an audience, a huge audience. Within a year, The Silver Spoon was the most powerful voice in the city's food scene. Chefs would stay up late, refreshing my site, praying for a mention. A good review could fill a dining room for a year. A bad one could close it. I had power, a strange and intoxicating power for a kid who felt powerless in every other aspect of his life. And that brought me to the memory I both cherished and cursed. The Crofts Table Review. 10 years ago, it wasn't the behemoth it is today. It was Alistair's first major venture, and it was failing. The critics had dismissed it as another generic, overpriced steakhouse. It was hemorrhaging money, but a source, a disgruntled line cook, tipped me off. He told me to ignore the steaks and order the duck. He said there was a young chef in the back, a woman named Elodie, who was a genius with French technique, but Alistair kept her hidden away, forcing her to churn out mediocre surf and turf. Intrigued I went. I sat at the bar, anonymous in the sparse, soulless dining room. I ordered the duck confit, and it was a revelation. The skin was impossibly crisp, the meat was succulent and rich, the sauce was a complex symphony of flavor. It was a perfect dish served in a deeply imperfect restaurant. I saw the story, not just of a dish, but of potential. I went home and wrote 2 drafts. The first was a scathing takedown of the entire establishment, a brutal piece that used the perfect duck as a weapon to highlight the laziness of everything else. It was vicious, and it was the kind of writing that had made The Spoon famous. But as I read it over, it felt wrong. It felt cruel. It would have destroyed the restaurant, and it would have buried the one spark of brilliance within it. So, I wrote a second draft. This one was different. It was a story of discovery. I celebrated that duck. I wrote about it with a passion and a detail that no one else had. I called it a lonely masterpiece, a beacon of hope in a sea of mediocrity. I championed the unknown chef behind it, and challenged Alistair to build his restaurant around that talent, not his own ego. I titled it, The Diamond in the Croft. I published the second one. The effect was nuclear. It was the talk of the town. Everyone had to try the duck. The restaurant was flooded with reservations. Alistair, ever the opportunist, took the credit. He rebranded, leaning into the sophisticated image I had crafted for him. He put the duck on the front of the menu. He became the visionary who had discovered this hidden gem. A month later, I heard he had fired Elodie, the brilliant chef, in a dispute over salary. He replaced her with a corporate yes-man who could replicate the dish adequately. He had my roadmap, and he used it to build his kingdom. I quit writing as the Silver Spoon. About 6 months after that, I was falling in love with Isabella, and I was falling in love with the act of creation, not criticism. The power felt hollow. I wanted to build my own duck confit, not just write about it. I enrolled in culinary school, and never looked back. I buried the Silver Spoon, putting the laptop, the passwords, the entire persona into a box, and shoving it into the back of a storage unit. Now, sitting in the dark of my own failing restaurant, the memory of that power, that ghost, came back to me. The fight with Isabella had pushed me to a new edge. Her inability to see her father for who he was, her reflexive defense of him, it made me realize I was truly alone in this fight. This wasn't just business anymore. This was personal. Alistair hadn't just attacked my livelihood. He had poisoned my marriage. A new feeling, cold and sharp, cut through the fog of my despair. It was the ghost of the Silver Spoon, whispering in my ear. The anger, the righteousness, the hunger for the perfect, a devastating sentence. What was I supposed to do? Let him win? Let him crush me and then play the doting father-in-law at my funeral? No. The decision solidified in my mind, turning from a desperate fantasy into a concrete plan. I stood up, my back straight for the first time all night. I knew what I had to do. I drove to the grimy 24-hour storage facility on the other side of town. The fluorescent lights hummed over rows of identical orange doors. I found my unit, number 34B, and wrestled with the rusty lock. The air inside was stale, thick with the smell of dust and forgotten time. And there it was, in a faded cardboard box labeled Old J School Stuff, a sleek, silver laptop from a decade ago. I brought it back to the bistro, plugged it in, and held my breath. It whirred to life, a digital ghost awakening from its slumber. I opened the old writing software. The files were still there, and I found it. The draft I had never published. Croft's table, all garnish, no substance. It was brutal, surgical, and utterly true. Reading those words, my own words from a lifetime ago, I felt a surge of adrenaline. The power was still there. The voice was still there. I had built Alistair Croft's reputation with a single review. I could dismantle it with another. I looked around my empty dining room, at the dream he was trying to turn into a nightmare. My jaw tightened. It wasn't about revenge, until it was. He had forgotten the man who wrote that review. He had forgotten the power of words. But I was about to give him a reminder that he, and the entire city, would never forget. The plan wasn't just to write a bad review. That would be artless. A simple act of vengeance. My goal was far more ambitious. I was going to perform a surgical dismantling of a myth, the myth of Alistair Croft, the culinary visionary. And to do that, I needed to become the Silver Spoon again, not just in name but in method. I needed to be invisible, untraceable, and armed with undeniable truth. The first 24 hours were a crash course in digital resurrection. I bought a burner phone with cash from a seedy corner store. I used a public library's Wi-Fi to purchase a VPN subscription and a private encrypted email service using a prepaid gift card. I reactivated the old Silver Spoon social media accounts through a series of complex proxy chains, wiping them clean and preparing for a new era. This wasn't just about hiding from Alistair. It was about building a fortress of anonymity. I was a journalist again, and my source was my own pain. The meticulous planning felt good. It was a constructive act in the face of so much destruction. It gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in a year. Next, I needed allies. I couldn't do this alone. The first call I made was to the only person on earth who knew my secret, Ben Carter. Ben had been my editor at the city paper's magazine section back when I was just a cub reporter. He was old school, a man who believed in the power of the press and had a healthy disdain for unearned authority. He was the one who, over beers one night, had listened to my rants about the city's vapid food critics and said, "So do it better. Start a blog. But for God's sake, kid, do it anonymously, or you'll never eat a peaceful meal in this town again." He became my silent mentor, my editor in the shadows. I called him on the burner phone. He picked up on the second ring. "Ben Carter." "Ben, it's me," I said. There was a long pause. "Grant? You sound like you're calling from inside a tin can. What's going on?" "I need your help with something," I said. "It's about the silver spoon." Another pause. "This one electric." I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. "The spoon," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I haven't heard that name in a decade. I thought he was dead." "He's coming out of retirement," I said, "for one last job." I laid out the whole story. Alistair, the sabotage, Marco, the slow, agonizing death of my bistro. Ben listened patiently, his silence punctuated only by the occasional grunt of disgust. When I was finished, he let out a long, slow whistle. "The man's own father-in-law," he said. "Shakespeare couldn't write this stuff, and he has no idea you're the guy who basically handed him his career on a silver platter, or a silver spoon, I should say." "He has no idea," I confirmed. "So what do you need from me?" Ben asked, his voice all business. "When the review is ready, I need it to land like an earthquake. I need it seeded to every major food blogger, every news outlet, every social media influencer in the city at the exact same moment. I need you to orchestrate the media blitz." "Consider it done," he said, without hesitation. "This isn't just a story, Grant. This is justice. But I have to ask you, man to man, have you thought about what this will do to Isabella?" The question hung in the air, heavy and sharp. "I have," I said, my own voice strained, "and it's the only thing that gives me pause. But what choice do I have? Let him destroy everything I've built. Let him destroy our marriage through 1,000 tiny cuts of manipulation and deceit. She can't see the man he really is. Maybe this is the only way to open her eyes." "Just be careful," Ben warned. "When you set a fire like this, the smoke gets in everyone's eyes, you included." My second ally was an unwitting one, Marco. I needed fresh intelligence from inside the enemy camp. I couldn't just review the food, I had to expose the rot underneath. Calling him was a risk. He might be loyal to his new benefactor, but I was counting on the fact that the reality of working for Alistair was far different from the fantasy he'd been sold. I waited a week, letting him settle in before calling him on my personal cell. I played the part of the concerned mentor. "Marco, it's Grant. Just calling to see how you're settling in over there." His voice was subdued, tired. "Hey chef, it's a lot." "I'm sure it is," I said gently. "It's a big operation." "It's not that," he said, and then he hesitated. I could hear the frustration bubbling under the surface. "It's just different. It's all about food cost percentages and ticket times. We're using frozen fish, chef. Frozen. For a $200 a head tasting menu. The duck can fit. They're buying it pre-made, vacuum sealed from a supplier in another state. We just crisped the skin." Bingo. This was the ammunition I needed. The diamond in the Croft was now a cubic zirconia. "Mr. Croft is intense," Marco continued, his voice dropping. "He walks the line every night, yelling at servers. The staff turnover is insane. Everyone is terrified of him." This isn't what I thought it would be. I felt a pang of sympathy for him, but it was quickly overshadowed by a cold, righteous anger. Alistair wasn't just a saboteur, he was a fraud. He was selling a memory, a reputation that I had created, and delivering a cheap imitation. He was profiting from a lie. The final piece of my plan involved diving back into my own digital archaeology. The hidden leverage wasn't just my identity, it was the proof of his hypocrisy. I spent hours sifting through the old encrypted Silver Spoon email account, and then I found it. An email from an address I didn't recognize, dated 1 week after my glowing review of Croft's Table had been published 10 years ago. The sender was AC Hospitality Legal. The subject line read, "A note of thanks and an inquiry." The email was cautiously worded, clearly written by a lawyer, but the message was clear. It was from Alistair's company. It thanked the Silver Spoon for the perceptive and career-defining review. It spoke of the unprecedented and positive impact on their business, And then came the hook. It asked if the silver spoon would be willing to offer private consulting services to help them maintain the high standard the spoon had identified. It even proposed a 5-figure retainer. I had laughed it off at the time and sent a curt one-sentence reply. The silver spoon is a critic, not a consultant. Do the work. But I had saved the email. I had saved the proof. The man who was currently trying to bankrupt me had once tried to hire me. The man who dismissed my bistro as a little project had begged for my expertise. I saved a copy of the email to a secure drive. This was more than a review. It was an exposé. I had the motive, the means, and now, the evidence. The meticulous planning phase was over. It was time to make a reservation. The reservation was made under the name Mr. Sterling, a nod to the silver of my nom de plume. I chose a Tuesday night, typically a time when a kitchen is settled, but not yet running on the fumes of a weekend rush. It's a night when the truth is often on the menu. I dressed in a simple dark suit, nothing that would draw attention. I was just another anonymous businessman, another face in the crowd. As I walked into the lobby of Croft's table, the first thing I saw was the portrait of Alistair, smirking down at his kingdom. I felt a grim satisfaction in knowing I was about to burn it all down. The hostess, a young woman with a practiced, hollow smile, led me to a small table in the corner. The dining room was exactly as I remembered it from my last visit with Isabella. Opulent, stuffy, and strangely lifeless. It felt like a museum of wealth, not a place to enjoy a meal. The clientele were the city's elite, talking loudly about stock prices and summer homes, barely glancing at the menus in their hands. The waiter, a man who looked like he'd been defeated by life years ago, handed me the wine list. It was a leather-bound tome filled with ridiculously marked-up Bordeaux and Napa Cabernets. I ordered a simple glass of Sancerre. He seemed almost disappointed, as if my choice had personally offended him. Then came the menu. It was a ghost of the one I had championed. The duck confit was still there, of course listed as the legendary Croft confit. The description was a flowery, self-congratulatory paragraph about a decade of perfection. I had to suppress a bitter laugh. I ordered it, along with a scallop appetizer and a side of their supposedly famous truffle fries. The scallops arrived first. They were pale and slightly rubbery, with a sear so faint it was barely there. They sat in a pool of what was supposed to be a lemon butter sauce, but it tasted thin and metallic, like it had been held in a steam table pan for hours. There was no soul, no spark. It was food designed not to offend, and in doing so, it failed to please. Then came the main event, the duck. It was placed before me with a theatrical flourish by the waiter. The legendary Croft confit, he announced, as if presenting the crown jewels. It looked the part. The skin was brown and crisp, but I knew its secret. I pressed my fork into the meat. It was dry. The succulent, fall-off-the-bone texture I remembered was gone, replaced by something fibrous and stringy. This wasn't the result of a long, slow rendering in its own fat. This was the product of a factory, a soulless piece of protein reheated to order. The sauce it sat on was cloyingly sweet, a cheap cherry glaze that bulldozed any subtlety the dish might have once possessed. It was a culinary lie. The truffle fries were the final insult. They were limp and greasy, with the acrid, chemical smell of cheap truffle oil, a product no self-respecting chef would ever allow in their kitchen. I ate a few bites of each dish, just enough to confirm my suspicions. I paid the exorbitant bill in cash, and left without a word. I didn't go home. I went straight to the hearth. In the quiet solitude of my own office, I opened the silver laptop. The ghost was waiting, and I began to write. The words didn't come out in a torrent of anger. They flowed with a cold, devastating precision. This wasn't a rant. It was an autopsy. I started with the headline, "The king has no clothes and his duck is dry." I didn't just critique the food. I told a story. I started by painting a picture of the Crofts table of a decade ago, a flawed but promising restaurant with a spark of genius. I quoted lines from my own original review, reminding the world of the promise I had once seen in that very dining room. I wrote about the legendary duck, the dish that built an empire. Then I pivoted. I described my recent meal in painstaking, excruciating detail. The pale scallops, the chemical truffle oil, the dry, factory-produced duck. I didn't use hyperbole, I used facts. I described the exact way the meat pulled away from the bone, the specific aftertaste of the sauce. I wrote, "The legendary Croft confit is no longer a dish, it is an act of cynical nostalgia. You are not paying for a chef's skill, you are paying for a memory, and the memory is better than the meal." But I didn't stop there. This was about more than just a bad dinner. It was about the character of the man behind it. A restaurant's soul is a reflection of its owner, I wrote, and the soul of Croft's table has grown cold. It has become a place that values profit over passion, image over integrity. This decline in quality is not an accident. It is a business strategy, and this strategy extends beyond his own kitchen. There are whispers in the culinary community, whispers of a titan so insecure in his own position that he resorts to sabotaging smaller, more passionate kitchens, whispers of a king who, having lost the ability to create, now seeks only to destroy. I didn't name myself or the Hearth. I didn't have to. The city's food scene was small. People would connect the dots, and then for the killing blow, I embedded a screenshot. It was the email from Alistair's legal team, the one from 10 years ago, thanking me and trying to hire me. I ended the review with a final mournful paragraph. I was the one who crowned this king. My words helped build this castle. It is therefore my solemn duty to inform you all that the castle is hollow, the throne is empty, and the king is a fraud. The silver spoon once gave Croft's table its reputation. Now, I am taking it back. I took a deep breath, my finger hovering over the publish button. I sent the draft to Ben. 5 minutes later my burner phone rang. "Jesus, Grant," was all he said. "This isn't a review. It's a declaration of war." He started it. I said. "I know," Ben replied. "Get ready. I'm sending it out. The internet is about to break." I clicked publish, and I sat back to watch the world burn. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Ben was a master of his craft. The review didn't just appear on the old blog. It exploded across the entire digital landscape of the city. It was on the homepage of the city's biggest news website. Under the headline, "Legendary Food Critic, the Silver Spoon Returns to Eviscerate Croft's Table." It was shared by every local food blogger, influencer, and journalist, each adding their own commentary about the shocking return of the city's most notorious critic. The hashtag #SpoonSpeaks was trending within the hour. I sat in my dark office, the only light coming from my laptop screen, as I watched the chaos unfold. The comments sections were a wildfire of debate and outrage. Old employees of Alistair's came out of the woodwork, sharing their own horror stories, confirming the toxic work environment and the cost-cutting measures. Diners who had recently eaten at Croft's table and felt disappointed but didn't know why suddenly felt validated. My review had given them a voice. Alistair's first response was pure, unadulterated arrogance. Around noon the next day, his PR firm issued a terse statement. "Croft's table has been a pinnacle of fine dining for a decade. We will not be rattled by the bitter ramblings of an anonymous, irrelevant blogger who is clearly seeking attention after years of obscurity. We stand by our food and our reputation." It was exactly the wrong move. The condescending tone only added fuel to the fire. People called it a non-apology. The screenshot of the email I had included was the masterstroke. It proved I wasn't just some random crank. I had a history with this place. It made Alistair's denial look like a blatant lie. By the end of the day, my phone started ringing. My personal phone. It was Isabella. Her voice was frantic, panicked. "Grant, have you seen this? This silver spoon thing? It's everywhere. Dad is going absolutely insane. He's smashing things in his office. He's screaming at everyone. What is happening?" I played dumb, a knot of guilt tightening in my chest. "I've seen it," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "It's pretty brutal. Brutal. It's a character assassination. And the things they're saying about him, sabotaging other restaurants. People are messaging me, asking if he was talking about you, about the Hearth. Is it true, Grant? Do you think this critic knows something?" "I don't know what he knows, Izzy," I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. but it sounds like he's telling the truth about the duck." She didn't know what to say to that. The call ended with a sense of unresolved tension that felt like a gaping wound. I had protected my business, but I had driven a wedge deep into my marriage. For a moment, I questioned my decision. Was this victory worth the cost? The answer came 2 days later. The initial wave of online fury had begun to translate into real-world consequences. A local news channel ran a segment outside Croft's table, showing an empty dining room on a Friday night. They interviewed a few people on the street who canceled their reservations, all citing the Spoon's review. Alistair's empire was visibly bleeding. His panic must have been reaching a fever pitch. He started making mistakes. He went on a local business podcast and, in a disastrous attempt at damage control, tried to portray himself as the victim of a jealous, cowardly troll. He ranted, he fumed, he called the Spoon a cancer on the industry. He looked unhinged. During the interview, in a moment of pure Freudian slippage, he said, "You have to be tough in this business. When some upstart chef with a fancy culinary degree and my daughter on his arm thinks he can open up shop down the street and steal my clientele, you have to push back." He'd as good as confessed. He hadn't named me, but he didn't have to. The podcast host was stunned into silence. The clip went viral almost instantly. That was the moment the ground shifted under my feet. It was the moment Isabella could no longer deny the truth. The front door of my apartment opened and closed softly. I was in the living room, nursing a glass of bourbon, the silver laptop sitting closed on the coffee table like a dormant weapon. Isabella walked in, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She wasn't wearing her nurse's scrubs. She was in her street clothes, her purse slung over her shoulder, as if she'd just come from a war zone. She didn't say anything at first. She just walked over to the window and stared out at the city lights. "I went to see him," she said finally, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "I went to his office. I played him the clip from that podcast. I waited, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it, the moment of truth. He tried to deny it," she continued, her voice cracking. "He said he was speaking hypothetically. He tried to twist the words, but I saw it in his eyes. Grant, you were right. You were right about everything." She turned to face me, and I saw a decade of carefully constructed illusions crumbling in her gaze. The image of her father as a tough but loving patriarch was gone, replaced by the ugly reality of a petty, vindictive tyrant. "He told me I had to choose," she whispered, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "He said if I was going to stand with you, the man who was letting this anonymous coward tear our family apart, then I wasn't welcome in his house anymore. He said I was as much of a traitor as you are." She took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "So I left. I packed a bag. I told him he wasn't the man I thought he was. And I left." She crossed the room and sank onto the couch beside me. She didn't cry. She just seemed empty. She had lost her father, or at least the idea of her father. I wrapped my arms around her, pulling her close. I felt a surge of love and admiration for her strength, mingled with the profound guilt of knowing I was the architect of her pain. I had won the war, but the collateral damage was the woman I loved. "I'm so sorry, Izzy," I whispered into her hair. "Don't be," she said, her voice muffled against my chest. "You didn't do this. He did. He built this prison of lies, and tonight, the walls finally came down." We sat there in silence for a long time, a new and fragile alliance forming in the ruins of her old one. She had chosen me. She had chosen our family. Alistair, however, wasn't done. Losing his daughter must have sent him over the edge. His desperation took on a new, more manipulative form. My personal phone rang a day later. It was him. His voice was smooth, unnervingly calm, the auditory equivalent of a shark gliding through water. "Grant, my boy," he said, the false bonhomie making my skin crawl. "A terrible business, this whole Spoon affair. Truly terrible. I'm worried about you. I'm worried about Isabella. This city is a viper's nest." "Is it?" I said, my voice cold. "It is," he affirmed. "Listen, I've been thinking. The pressure of running a small place like the Hearth, it's immense. Maybe it's time to take a step back. I have an opening for a corporate executive chef, Oversight of menu development for the whole portfolio. Good hours. Great pay. You could close that little bistro. Come work for me. We could weather this storm together. As a family. I was stunned into silence by the sheer audacity of the offer. He was trying to buy me. After trying to destroy me, his next move was to try to own me. He wanted to put me in a golden cage, to make me a well-paid subordinate in his empire, effectively silencing me forever. It was a desperate, pathetic attempt to regain control. He still saw me as a pawn on his chessboard, a piece to be moved or sacrificed at his will. He had no idea he was talking to the player on the other side of the board. "Thank you for the offer, Alistair," I said, my voice dripping with an irony that was completely lost on him. "But I'm not for sale. I like my little bistro. I think I'll keep it." I hung up the phone, a grim smile on my face. The king was panicking. His castle was crumbling, and he was about to find out who had lit the match. The final confrontation happened on my territory. It was a Sunday night, 2 weeks after the review had dropped. The hearth was closed, and I was doing inventory in the quiet kitchen. Isabella was with me, wiping down the bar, a comfortable silence between us. We were rebuilding, not just the business, but our life together. The front door of the bistro rattled, then opened. Alistair Croft stood there, silhouetted against the streetlights. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in 2 weeks. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his face was gaunt, and his eyes were hollow with desperation. He looked smaller, somehow. The larger-than-life titan had shrunk. He walked in, his gaze sweeping over the small, intimate dining room with a look of undisguised contempt. He saw Isabella, and his face hardened. "So this is where you're hiding," he said, his voice a low growl. "I'm not hiding, Dad," Isabella said, her voice steady. "I'm home." Alistair ignored her, his eyes locking on me. He walked right up to the bar, his hands gripping the polished wood. "This has to stop," he said. "This silver spoon, he's destroying me. My suppliers are pulling out. My investors are calling for my resignation. Croft's table is half empty every night." He sounded like a petulant child complaining about a broken toy. There was no remorse, no self-awareness, only a sense of profound narcissistic injury. "I don't know what you want me to do about it," I said calmly, leaning back against the counter. "I want you to help me," he snarled, his voice cracking. "You're in this world, you hear things. Help me find him. Help me find this cowardly son of a bitch, who's hiding in the shadows. I'll pay you. I'll give you anything. I'll make you my partner. We can run the empire together. Just help me destroy him." The offer hung in the air, putrid and desperate. He wanted to hire me to hunt myself. The irony was so perfect, so complete, that I almost laughed. Isabella looked at me, her eyes wide, waiting to see what I would do. I let the silence stretch out, enjoying the exquisite agony on his face. Then I gave him a slow, deliberate smile. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated vindication. "You don't have to look so far, Alistair," I said, my voice quiet, but carrying the weight of a decade of secrets. I reached under the bar and pulled out the slim silver laptop. I placed it on the bar between us, its surface gleaming under the dim lights. I turned it on. The screen flickered to life, displaying the administrator page for the Silver Spoon blog. His eyes darted from the screen to my face, a flicker of confusion in their depths. "What is this?" he demanded. 10 years ago," I said, my voice as sharp and clean as a freshly honed knife. "You had a failing steakhouse. It was about to go under. But one night, an anonymous critic saw a spark of potential in a single dish and wrote a review that saved you. He handed you a roadmap, and you used it to build your entire empire. You owe your entire career to him." The blood drained from his face as the dawning horror began to register. His jaw went slack. His eyes, for the first time, looked at me, truly looked at me, and saw something other than his daughter's husband, or a minor annoyance. "You?" he whispered, the word a strangled gasp. "It was you?" I just nodded. I turned the laptop around and clicked on a file. It was the saved email from his legal team, the one where they tried to hire me as a consultant. He stared at the screen, his own company's words condemning him. The proof was undeniable. The ghost he was hunting was standing right in front of him. The rival he had tried to crush was the very architect of his success. He staggered back, his hand flying to his chest, as if he'd been physically struck. The sequence of emotions that played across his face was a spectacle to behold: utter disbelief, followed by a flash of impotent rage, which then crumbled into the pathetic, hollow expression of total and complete defeat. He understood. He finally understood how thoroughly he had been outmaneuvered. He hadn't just been beaten, he had been undone by his own arrogance. "It was never about being your rival, Alistair," I said, my voice calm and final. "I never wanted to compete with you. I just wanted to cook. I wanted to build something of my own. You're the one who declared war. You're the one who couldn't stand to see someone else succeed on their own terms. You did this to yourself." He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked at Isabella, a desperate, pleading look in his eyes. She just shook her head slowly, her expression a mixture of pity and resolve. She stood with me. "I think it's time for you to go," I said. It wasn't a request, it was a dismissal. He stared at me for a long moment, a fallen king in a kingdom he no longer controlled. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of my restaurant, disappearing into the night. The bell on the door gave a cheerful little jingle, a ridiculously mundane sound for such a monumental moment. The war was over, and I had won. In the months that followed, life settled into a new kind of normal. The legend of what happened became a piece of city folklore, whispered about in kitchens and dining rooms. The story in its broadest strokes had gotten out. The Titan, Alistair Croft, brought down by the anonymous critic he never knew was his own son-in-law. Croft's table limped on for a while, a ghost ship in the fine dining scene, before it was finally sold at a massive loss to a hotel conglomerate. They turned it into a generic lobby bar. Alistair disappeared from public life, a disgraced king in self-imposed exile. The Hearth, on the other hand, flourished. The notoriety from the story brought a wave of curious customers, but it was the food and the atmosphere that turned them into regulars. My little bistro, once on the brink of death, was now thriving, filled every night with the happy buzz of people enjoying a good meal. My story, once a tale of sabotage and despair, was finally the one I had intended to write. A story of passion. Marco, my old sous chef, came back. He showed up at my back door one afternoon, cap in hand, looking sheepish. He apologized profusely. He said working at Croft's table for those few weeks was the most miserable experience of his culinary life. I saw the sincerity in his eyes, and the passion for cooking that Alistair had almost extinguished. I hired him back on the spot. He's been my right hand ever since. My relationship with Isabella healed and became stronger than ever. The destruction of her father's image was painful, but it was also liberating. She was free from the weight of his expectations and manipulations. We were a team now, in a way we never could have been before. We were building our own legacy, one based on honesty and mutual respect, not on secrets and lies. Sometimes, late at night, I sit at the bar of my bustling restaurant and reflect on the whole affair. Was it about revenge? Maybe in the end it was. I'm human, after all. There's a grim satisfaction in seeing a bully get exactly what they deserve. It wasn't about revenge, but the justice was satisfying. But it was also about something more. It was about drawing a line. It was about defending my dream and my family from a man who believed his power gave him the right to destroy whatever he couldn't control. Alistair's empire was a house of cards, built on a single lucky review and propped up by ego and fear. My success, I hope, is built on something more solid. Good food, hard work, and the belief that a dish, like a life, should be prepared with integrity. He saw me as a small-time rival, but his real rival was his own insecurity. So I want to ask you, has anyone ever tried to write your story for you? Has anyone ever underestimated you, tried to dim your light so theirs could shine brighter? It's a terrible feeling, to have your passion dismissed as a hobby, your dream treated like a threat. What I learned is that sometimes, the only way to protect what you've built is to remind the world and yourself of who you truly are and the power you hold. You don't have to be a secret food critic to do it. You just have to be unwilling to let anyone else write your ending. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Did I go too far, or did he get what was coming to him? I'm curious to hear your stories. And if you've enjoyed mine, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. there are always more stories to tell.